this morning and spending your Saturday learning about healthy eating. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share with you this morning. And inshallah, you'll come away with some practical and useful tips to help you eat healthier. As we go through the presentation this morning, please feel free to type in your comments or your questions in the attendee chat, and I'll try to address them as we go along, but also at the end. So I'd like to start off by reading a really beautiful message posted on Instagram by Thyra Antikasmali this week. I thought it was very fitting of our topic of healthy eating, and it really captures that the impact of food choices have on our life and that they go beyond just numbers and nutrients, but they impact so much more. So they say we are what we eat. Every day, billions of cells are being replaced in our body, composed of the food we eat. Food influences our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. But beyond that, we are also how we eat. Our eating style reflects our personality and in turn impacts it. It is an expression of the role that food plays in our lives. Food satisfies a need within us. It nourishes the body and influences the soul. It is a pleasant experience which brings people together. It manifests culture and heritage. Food has a huge role in life, and it makes sense to think about how to do it right. So I'm sure many of you have read or heard about healthy eating from various sources, whether it's from the internet or social media or even from your friends. Oftentimes, I find as a dietitian, it's really easy to tell people to eat less salt or eat less sugar. But what exactly does that mean? Because when you're buying or preparing food, it's a lot more complicated. When you go into the grocery store, you're given so much choice. There are so many products being promoted as healthy, and there's so much food advertising. And many of us don't have a lot of time to spend reading and figuring out all the information on those food labels. Research actually shows that most people find reading and understanding food labels very difficult. There are lots of confusing numbers, claims that people don't trust, and also something as simple as the type is very tiny and we might not have our reading glasses or a magnifying glass handy to read those labels. Sometimes it's just easier to keep buying the foods that you always buy or just buy what's on special in the flyers. But we also know that there's research to show that if you do read and understand food labels, you can make healthier food choices and overall eat a healthier diet. So I want to start off by asking in the audience, how many of you read food labels right now? If you can just maybe type yes or no. And for those of you who do read food labels, do you understand all the information on those labels? So I'll give you a minute to respond. Okay, so I'm seeing lots of yeses, which is very nice to see. But some of you don't always understand the information. And that's my goal today, is to help make this easier and more practical, and also make it quicker so you don't have to spend a lot of times, but just to point out some quick tips to make label reading easier. The other good news is that in Canada, we know Health Canada has been listening to all the complaints about how confusing labels are, and they have made some changes. And these changes are coming into effect next year, so in 2021. So this is a great time to learn about that. Now, I don't know in the audience, I apologize, I don't know how many of you are from Canada or the US. The labels I'll be presenting this morning are the North American labels. If you are from the UK or Europe, I apologize, your labels are slightly different, but I think many of the concepts are still the same. Okay, so when you go into the grocery store and you pick up a package, there are three places where you might find some nutrition information. There's the ingredient list, the nutrition facts panel, and the claims. And we'll go through each of these in a little more detail. Um, Almost everything you buy in the grocery store, whether it's made locally or it's imported, does have this information on the label. However, there are a few exceptions. So things like fresh fruits and vegetables don't require an ingredient list or nutrition facts panel. So for example, if you buy a bag of apples or buy a bag of onions, you'll see it doesn't have any nutrition information there. When you buy raw meat or poultry or fish or seafood, it doesn't require a label. Foods that are prepared or made in the grocery store, like your bakery items or salads, also don't require the food label. And then lastly, foods that have very few nutrients, like tea or coffee or spices, also are not required by law to have that label. But everything else will have a label. I know many of us are doing our grocery shopping a little bit differently this year. We're spending less time in the store, going less often, and maybe even ordering our groceries online. And with the upcoming lockdown in Toronto, I know many more of us will be avoiding the grocery store and using not only the convenience, but also the safety of grocery delivery. And the good news is most online stores, whether you look at Amazon or Walmart or Grocery Gateway or Loblaws, they all give you the label information on the website when you're ordering. So you can still read labels and still make healthy choices, even when you're grocery shopping online. So let's start and let's look at that ingredient list. When we look at the ingredient list, it's usually found on the side or the back of the package, and ingredients are listed in descending order by weight. And what that means is the first ingredient listed is what that product contains the most of. The last ingredient is what that product contains the least of. So, for example, if you are choosing a bread or a cereal, you might want something like whole grain to be the first ingredient. You probably don't want something like salt or sugar to be the first ingredient. The ingredient list is also very helpful if you have a food allergy or an intolerance, or you're following a special diet that uh, causes you to restrict certain foods. And on the ingredient list at the bottom, you'll see in bold, it will say contains, and it will list the most common allergens. And I'll show you an example in a minute. Okay, so here we have an example, and this is a granola bar. Notice all those ingredients. It might surprise you to see what's in this product. And oftentimes, granola bars are advertised as healthy choices, and we often think they're better than cookies, and we're giving them to our kids or our grandkids. But are they really healthier? So let's take a look at this particular product. We'll see that granola is the first ingredient, but then I've also highlighted in red all the different types of sugars. And you'll see brown sugar is the second ingredient, so the second most abundant part of this product. And you'll also see sugars listed in many, many different ways. So that basically tells us that there's a lot of sugar in this product. And maybe it's not better than some other snack foods out there. Now here is another example. So I apologize, it's a little bit blurry, but this is just a box of masala mix that you might buy in your Indian grocery store or even in your regular grocery store. And it's something a lot of people use in their cooking. Now you'll notice the first ingredient is salt. And that means there's more salt in this package than any other spice. And we know that eating too much salt actually increases our blood pressure. And so we're trying to use less salt in our cooking and use other flavors instead. And spices are excellent. They're all healthy. They're full of antioxidants. They add flavor without the salt. So if you are cooking, try to use spices that don't contain salt. And instead of buying these pre-made blends, try to make your own so you're avoiding that salt as the main ingredient. Okay, so I mentioned that the labels are changing next year, and this shows you some of the changes coming to the ingredient list. So first thing, the font size is now standardized, so it's going to be a little bigger and easier to use. It won't be so tiny. There are also bullets between each ingredient to make it easier to look at. And one of the best things that they've done is now sugar has to be grouped together. So you'll notice on the original label, you have molasses, brown sugar, sugar. They're all different types of sugar, but they're listed separately. With the new labels, all sugar will be grouped together. And you'll notice that now it's moved to the first ingredient on that list, because now by weight, sugar is the most abundant item in this product. So that's good news. And I also mentioned the common allergens. So you'll see at the bottom, it says contains wheat, egg, and soy. So Health Canada actually has a list of common allergens, and those have to be listed at the bottom of the ingredient list. So some good changes that are coming. Okay, so let's move on to the nutrition facts panel. And this is standardized in terms of format on all packages, and it's probably the most important place to look for nutrition information. So the nutrition facts panel lets you learn about the nutrients and the exact amounts that the product contains. It helps you to compare similar foods. It helps you to look for foods that have a little or a lot of a certain nutrient. And it also helps you to pick foods that are for special diets. Now you'll notice that all nutrients are listed in grams or milligrams on one side, and then listed as a percent on the other. You'll also notice that there are lots of nutrients listed. Some of these are mandatory and the others are optional. Now, I think realistically, most of us don't have to read every single nutrient. The most important ones would be things like looking at the saturated fat, the fiber, the sodium, and the sugar. If you are following a special diet or looking for a particular nutrient, you might want to look beyond these. So for example, if you're living with diabetes, you might pay attention to the total carbohydrate number. If you have osteoporosis or anemia, you might also be looking at the calcium or iron numbers. But overall, if you're just looking at eating a general healthy diet, pay attention to that saturated fat, the fiber, the sodium, and the sugar. Those are probably the most important ones to look at. Now, when we look at this nutrition facts panel, the very first thing you want to do is look at the serving size listed on top. And this is listed in either grams or milliliters, but also in common household measures like cups. And all the information on the label is based on that serving size. Now, currently, serving size is determined by the manufacturer. So not all serving sizes are equal. So for example, you might go into the cereal aisle, and cereal A, the serving size is a cup. Cereal B, the serving size is 3/4 of a cup, and cereal C, the serving size is 1.5 cups. So it makes it a little harder to compare. The other thing that's important is to notice how much you are actually eating. So I don't know about you, but I know that when I, for example, eat cereal in the morning, I just pour it into my bowl. I don't put it into a measuring cup to look at how much I'm eating. I don't weigh it. So chances are what I pour into my bowl is more than what the serving size listed says. So it's important to remember that if you're going to eat double the serving size, you want to make sure you double all the numbers below that. And if you only eat half the serving size, then you're going to cut the numbers in half. Now, again, with the new labels, there's some good news when it comes to serving size. So now there's more standardization with the serving size. So it's more likely to reflect what an adult would eat in one sitting. So it's more realistic. And that makes it a lot easier to compare similar foods. And the other good change is that when it comes to individual containers, the serving size must reflect the entire container. So I have here the example of milk. And originally, you'll see that that carton of milk is 473 milliliters, and you're more likely to drink that whole container. But the nutrition facts information is only for 250 milliliters. So you'd have to do quite a bit of math to figure out the total. Whereas with the new labels, the information is per carton, so for the entire 473 milliliters. So I think that's a good change, and that will make things easier as well. Now, let's talk a little bit about those percentages. So percent daily value, I've circled it here. And this is actually a very good thing to look for. I don't know how many of you are looking at the percentages right now, but looking at the percentages makes label reading a lot easier and a lot quicker. So the percent daily value is basically calculated based on the nutrient requirements that a healthy adult eating about 2,000 calories a day needs. So they've converted the grams or milligrams into a percent of what an adult needs to eat in the day. So if we go back to this label and we look at, for example, fiber, and it says 2 grams of fiber, what that means is 2 grams of fiber is 7% of the total fiber you need to eat in a day. So it just makes it easier to understand in the scheme of your eating what that product is giving you. You don't have to memorize your daily goals for every nutrient, and it just makes it easier to see if there's a little or a lot of a nutrient in the food. And there are only 2 numbers that you need to remember when it comes to label reading, and those are 5 and 15. 5% or less daily value means there's a little of a nutrient, and 15% daily value or more means there's a lot of a nutrient. So how do you use that? Well, this is probably the most important slide I'm going to show you today. So if you just think of looking at 15% or more for the things you want to eat more of. So for example, fiber, protein, vitamins, and minerals. Look for 15% or more. For the things that you want to eat less of, like that sodium and saturated fat, look for 5% or less. So 15% or more for the good stuff and 5% or less for the not so good stuff. Now, again, changes coming to the nutrition facts panel. And you'll notice that there are a few differences between the original, which is the current label, and the new label coming out next year. There's, as I mentioned, a more standardized serving size. The calories are bolded. There's a new percent daily value for sugar that doesn't exist right now, which is great, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And you'll also notice when we look at the vitamins and minerals, right now, vitamin A and vitamin C are required on all labels, but with the new labels, now it's potassium, calcium, and iron. And that's because most people don't have a hard time eating enough vitamin A or vitamin C, but they do have a hard time getting enough of the minerals, and especially potassium. So that's a nice change to the label. You'll also notice right at the bottom that 5% is a little, 15% is a lot. That rule is going to be printed on all the new labels. So even if you forget those 2 numbers, come January, you'll start seeing it on labels. Some companies have already switched to these new labels. I've noticed in the grocery store quite a few of the bigger companies have switched, but hopefully by the end of next year, you'll notice that all the labels have switched to this new format. Okay, so let's come back to sugar for a minute. I mentioned that 5 and 15% rule, but when it comes to sugar, it's actually really difficult to find foods that are 5% or less when it comes to sugar. And that's because sugar is a little more complicated because there are two types of sugars. There are natural sugars and added sugars. And unfortunately, with the labels in Canada, they don't separate those two. We're hoping that they will make that change in the coming years, but right now that's not there. And when it comes to natural sugar, that's not the one we want to worry about. And when you look at products like your fruits or your milk or your dairy, they all have natural sugars. It's the added sugar that you want to be careful about. So just to give you some examples, when you take a glass of milk, there's 13% sugar in that milk. That's just the natural lactose in the milk. So that's okay. But look what happens when you have chocolate milk. You jump to 26% sugar. So that's the natural sugar plus the added sugar. If you look at your yogurt, your plain yogurt is about 12% natural sugar. When you look at the fruit bottom yogurt, you jump to 31% sugar. When you look at fruit, so for example, if you're buying a bag of frozen berries, it's only 6% natural sugar, but if you drink juice, you're at 25% sugar. So it's all that added and free sugar that you're really worried about. So with the sugar, we'll try to find products that say 15% or less daily value for sugar. Another good tip is to remember that 1 teaspoon of sugar equals 4 grams. And I don't know how many of you have looked at the sugar guidelines, but currently the World Health Organization states that for women, we should aim for no more than 6 teaspoons of added sugar per day, and for men, no more than 9 teaspoons of added sugar per day. So remembering that 1 teaspoon equals 4 grams can be handy. Okay, so let's make this a little more practical and look at some labels. So here I have a box of cereal. And most of the time when we're picking a cereal, we want it to have a lot of fiber. So if we look at this cereal and we look at, first of all, the serving size, because we want to make sure that's realistic. Here it's only 1/3 of a cup. Now, I don't know if you can visualize, 1/3 of a cup is not a lot of cereal. It's only, maybe a little bit of cereal to fill the bottom of your bowl. But when we look at the fiber number here, it has 12 grams of fiber or 48% daily value. So 1/3 of a cup of cereal is going to give you 48% of the total fiber you need in the day. So that's actually pretty good. Now let's look at another example. And here's a comparison between skim milk and a flavored milkshake or a flavored milk that you might get in the grocery store. And let's compare. So you'll notice the serving size is a little bit different. The flavored milk actually has a slightly bigger serving size. But then let's look at that saturated fat. So the saturated fat is the fat that raises cholesterol and the one we want to reduce in our diet. And you'll see in the skim milk, it's 0%. And in the flavored milk, it's 21%. And then if we go down to sugar, we have 11 grams of sugar in the skim milk. And again, that's mostly lactose. But look at the flavored milk. We've gone to 40 grams of sugar. That's a huge difference. And I think, a lot of people are concerned with drinking milk. I get lots of questions around, is milk healthy? And you can see, if you choose the right type of milk, it's pretty healthy. It's when you get into the flavored or the milkshake type products that you run into sugar with too much fat and too much sugar. Okay, so let's look at another example. So here we have 2 burgers. And you'll notice the serving size is exactly the same. But if you look at the saturated fat and sodium, you'll notice quite a big difference between product 1 and product 2. So in this case, product 2 has much lower saturated fat. 17% versus 38% in product 1, and you'll notice the sodium is also lower. But you also might notice that both of these numbers are still higher than our 5% rule. So what does that mean? Well, it means you might come across a lot of products that are not perfect, especially when you're looking at things like meat. And it just means that you want to keep in mind that this might be something you eat once in a while rather than something you choose on a regular basis. But you still want to look at the numbers and try to pick the best one you can. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some time to practice. And I have 2 labels here. They're both from yogurts. One is a plain yogurt and one is a fruit flavored yogurt. So take a minute to look at both of them, compare them, and then maybe type into the chat box which yogurt you would choose. Okay, I see a lot of you have typed in plain yogurt, and you're right. And here, if we look, again, starting at the serving size, it's exactly the same. But when it comes to sugar, you'll notice there's a big difference. So the plain yogurt has 6 grams of sugar in 3/4 of a cup, but the fruit flavored yogurt has 19 grams of sugar. Now, if you take 19 and you subtract 6, which is the natural sugar, basically you're left with 13 grams of added sugar. And that's about 3 teaspoons of added sugar. That's a lot of sugar. So, what can you do if you don't like plain yogurt? Well, add your own toppings. So, when you add fresh or frozen fruit, you're just adding natural sugar. You're not adding any of the added refined sugars. You can add nuts, you can add seeds. If you don't like the sour taste, even a drop of vanilla or a few drops of honey or maple syrup is still a lot healthier than buying something that's pre-sweetened where you don't have control over the amount of sugar that you're eating. Okay, here's another one for you to practice on. So these are 2 sauces. One is the regular and one is the fat-free version. Again, take a minute to look at both of them and pick which one would be a healthier choice. And maybe you can even type in why you think it's a healthier choice. And so for those of you who are still looking at it, I'll just give you a few hints. Take a look at the serving size and then focus on some of the things I've said are important, like the saturated fat, the sodium, the sugar, and the fiber. Okay, so I have a few different answers. Some say fat-free, some say regular. So why don't we look at them together? So we'll start with the serving size, and it's the same, so we can do a direct comparison. I haven't asked you to look at calories, but in this case, it's quite interesting. The regular has 100 calories, and you would think the fat-free would be lower in calories, but it's not. It's higher. So that's your first clue that something's a little bit suspicious here. Now, if we look at the fat in the regular, there's 0 saturated fat, and in the fat-free, there's 0 saturated fat. The regular does have 4 grams of total fat. So what does that mean? On labels, it's not required to write the unsaturated fat. But if you take the total fat and you subtract the saturated fat, you're left with the good fat or the unsaturated fat. So in this case, both products don't have any of the saturated fat. The regular product has some good fat. Now, if we move down the list, the sodium is exactly the same. But if we come down to carbohydrates, and carbohydrates include sugar, fiber, and starch. The fiber, which is important, which we want lots of, is exactly the same between the two products. But look at the sugar. In the regular product, we have 7 grams or just less than 2 teaspoons of sugar. And in the fat-free, we have 29 grams of sugar or more than 7 teaspoons of sugar. What do you think happens to all that extra sugar in our body if we're not burning it off? It turns to fat. So with the fat-free product, we've gotten rid of 4 grams of fat, but we've added 29 grams of sugar. So at the end of the day, that's much worse for your health than the regular product. And I think a lot of us fall prey to these claims of fat-free or low fat, and it's not always the best choice because fat adds flavor to our foods. And when you take the fat out, you take away the flavor. And manufacturers will replace that fat with either salt or sugar in most cases. And so, you want to take a look at what have they added. So buying a fat-free, for example, sauce or salad dressing or mayonnaise might actually not be a healthier choice than the regular. So it's always important to look beyond that claim and look at the numbers yourself. Now, when it comes to dairy products, this is an exception. So I had showed you, for example, the skim milk. When they make low-fat dairy, they're not allowed to add any extra sugar to that product. So it's not as much of a concern. But when you have other products, like I mentioned, the sauces or the salad dressings, they do oftentimes add lots of salt and sugar to replace the flavor of the fat. So that is something to pay attention to. Okay, so I hope that helped in terms of looking at that nutrition facts panel. I think, again, 2 important things to remember: 15% or more for the nutrients you want to eat more of, and 5% or less for the nutrients you don't want to eat too many of. So now we're going to move on to the nutrition claims. And these are things that you might see on the front of the package. The claims are optional, so they're not a requirement. But a lot of companies will add them because it makes the product sound healthy. Some of the claims are regulated. So for example, when it talks about a nutrient, so for example, if it says low sodium or high fiber or low fat, that is a regulated claim. And the company must meet certain criteria to have that claim. Other claims like all natural or heart healthy or made with fruit, those are more marketing claims and they make the product sound healthier, but there's no regulation on what they need to have in the product to make that claim. I think at the end of the day, claims can be useful to a certain extent, but it's still important to look at the numbers and refer to that nutrition facts panel to make the healthiest choice possible. But that being said, I wanted to go through some common claims and just help you to sort of understand what they mean. So here again is a box of cereal, and you'll notice on the front of the box it says high fiber. When a company claims high fiber, it must contain at least 5 grams of fiber per serving. So that is a regulated claim. And if we look at the numbers on this box, it actually contains 10 grams of fiber. So the number matches the claim. So that's actually a good one to look for. Now here we have 2 cans of soup, and we're looking at sodium. And you'll probably have noticed that they add salt or sodium to almost every packaged product. And there are different claims. So here we have something that's labeled low sodium and something that's labeled 25% less sodium. And they're both marketed as healthy choices, but there is quite a big difference. when a product is labeled low sodium, that's a regulated claim and it must contain less than 140 milligrams per serving. So that's a good thing to look at. Just to put it into perspective, on a day-to-day basis, the current guidelines say that we should try to eat less than 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day. So low sodium would be a good choice. Now, if we look at the 25% less sodium, that just means 25% less than the original product. And a lot of canned foods are loaded in sodium. So the original might have 1,000 or more milligrams, and the 25% less in this case has 600 milligrams. So it's still quite high in sodium. It's giving you, more than a third of your day's sodium in just one serving. And so it's really important to look for products that say low sodium or no salt added, especially when you're looking at cans. So when you're choosing things like soups or beans or chickpeas or crushed tomato or tomato paste or your canned vegetables, look for ones that say low sodium or no salt added rather than the ones that say reduced or less sodium. Okay, so here's another popular claim that you see on a lot of packages. You might have seen no cholesterol on things like your potato chips or your French fries, your cooking oils. I've even seen it on a bag of baby potatoes. And what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that that product is healthy or low in fat or low in salt. All it means is that product is not made from animals, because cholesterol is something that's made in the liver of animals, and animals' foods contain cholesterol. Plants don't make cholesterol, and they don't have cholesterol. So, if you're looking at something like a bag of chips, they're made with vegetables, either potato or banana in this case, and a vegetable oil. So it never had cholesterol to begin with. So for them to say 100% natural, no cholesterol, makes it sound healthy, but it really doesn't tell us anything about the nutrition information. So that's something that's more of a marketing claim rather than an important health claim to look for. And it's also important to realize that the cholesterol that we eat in our foods actually doesn't have a big impact on our blood cholesterol. The big culprit when it comes to blood cholesterol is actually that saturated fat that I've been mentioning. So saturated and trans fats raise our cholesterol much more than the cholesterol in our foods. Another example might be something like palm oil. So palm oil comes from a plant. It has zero cholesterol, but it's full of saturated fat, and it really raises our blood cholesterol. So it's really paying attention to the saturated fat more than the cholesterol that's important. And then we move on to another popular claim about sugar. And you might notice things like juices or apple sauces or canned fruit. A lot of them are promoted as 100% fruit or 100% juice, no sugar added. But you want to look beyond that and look at the label. So in this example of orange juice, if we were to look at the numbers, it would say it has 28 grams of sugar per glass, or 7 teaspoons of sugar. That's a lot of sugar. That's a lot more sugar than you'd get in an orange. Where does this sugar come from in juice? Well, it comes from the fruit. But when you squeeze the juice out of a fruit, you're left with mostly sugar and water. And the sugar is separated from all the other nutrients like fiber and the vitamins and minerals. And that separated sugar actually acts like added sugar in our body. It doesn't act like the natural sugar that you would get eating a whole piece of fruit. So look at the numbers when it comes to juice. You'll also notice that it's very hard to find fiber in juice. And in fact, most juices, even those that say with the pulp, have lots of sugar, but they don't have any fiber. And so I think the bottom line here is eat your fruits and vegetables whole whenever you can. and limit the juice that you drink. It's very similar, actually, in sugar content to most soft drinks and pop. So not as healthy as what the companies claim to be. Okay. I'm just going to go on to a couple more examples, and then I'll come back to some of the questions in the chat box. So the next claim is light. And what does light mean? You might have seen that on packages. And light actually can mean various different things. It's not a regulated term. It can mean light in color, light in texture, light in sugar, light and fluffy. It can mean anything. If we look at this bottle of olive oil, it's labeled extra light. And what does that mean? Well, if we look at olive oil, it's an excellent oil. It's recommended in Hadith, but there are so many different types of olive oil in the grocery store. So when you look at extra virgin olive oil, that's your best choice. That's the first pressing of the olive. And what you get is an oil that's full of healthy fats, but it's also full of antioxidants and polyphenols or healthy plant compounds. And these compounds are what give olive oil that greenish color, the aroma, and the taste that olive oil has. And that's what makes it so healthy and makes it such a good choice compared to all the other oils out there. Now, when you look at this product labeled extra light, how did they make it extra light? Well, what they do is it's not the first pressing, it's one of the last pressings of the olive. So you're left with probably one of the lower quality oils, and they've filtered it to remove all the compounds that give it taste and color. So you're actually left with a pretty poor quality olive oil. So the key when it comes to choosing olive oil, look for extra virgin on the bottle. And another tip is to look for something that comes in a darker bottle. The dark bottle helps protect against oxidation of all these good compounds. So you'll see even with this bottle, it's clear. So that's one sign that it's probably not the best quality to start with. Okay, so I do have a question about olive oil. What is the difference between the different types of extra virgin olive oils? Some mention that they are specific for cooking and some for frying. And this is from the UK, but I think we see that in North America as well. So excellent question. So with any type of oil, I think the concern is the smoke point or the point at which that oil will burn, and then you lose all the benefits. With your extra virgin olive oil, the smoke point is close to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And in regular cooking, whether it's on your stovetop, whether you're sauteing or stir frying, or you're putting something in the oven, most of the time we're under 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And using an extra virgin olive oil that's labeled for cooking is absolutely fine. Sometimes, though, if you're using extremely high temperatures, for example, not so much on your stovetop, but if you're putting something on the barbecue or on the grill, you might exceed the smoke point, and you'll start to see your olive oil start to burn, and then you've lost the benefits of that oil. And in that case, you might choose an oil that's labeled with a higher smoke point. And it can be an olive oil that's been processed a little more, or it can be something like your avocado oil or your peanut oil or your grapeseed oil. And that might be an alternative to use at high temperatures. But I think for probably the majority of your cooking and baking, use the regular extra virgin cold pressed olive oil. Okay, so moving on, there are some health claims that refer to a specific health condition. And here's an example. This one says, oat fiber helps lower cholesterol. And that's true, and it is a regulated claim. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is the best fiber or the best cereal to eat, but it does contain oat fiber, and that can help you lower your cholesterol. There are other claims as well. So for example, you might see a claim that says, A diet low in saturated and trans fat reduces the risk of heart disease. You might also see a claim that says a diet high in fruits and vegetables reduces your risk of cancer. So these are health claims. I think they're used mostly for marketing by companies, but you will see them, and that's why I wanted to mention them. But let's move on to some claims that are actually funny, that I find, that are just marketing, but so many food manufacturers use them to promote their products. So for example, when you see all natural, makes it sound healthy, but you also have to remember that salt is all natural and sugar is all natural. Just because a product says all natural doesn't mean it's going to be low in salt or sugar or healthy. When you see something like no preservatives, you'll often see things like potato chips. They don't have preservatives, but it doesn't mean that it's a healthy product. Another one that really bothers me is something that says made with real fruit or vegetable. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So fruit roll-ups or fruit snacks that you get for kids, they say made with real fruit, but they're only made with a tiny amount of real fruit juice. The rest is all sugar. Eating a fruit roll-up is definitely not the same as eating an apple. You see things like pasta that's vegetable flavored or veggie straws that say made with vegetable. Well, those only contain a very small amount of powdered vegetable. It's definitely not the same as eating a bowl of salad or eating some broccoli. But the label makes it sound like it's just as good. Another very popular claim right now is low carb and gluten-free. And it's very trendy to eat low carb or gluten-free. And not all of us have to eat this way. I think if you do live with celiac disease or you're on a special diet for a medical condition, you might want to look for foods that are low carb or gluten-free. But for the majority of us, I think gluten-free is not the way to go. These products are often higher in sugar and refined starches, and they're lower in fiber, and they also cost a lot more. So something to be aware of. And then lastly, especially I know in Canadian grocery stores, we have a lot of company brands. We have things like Blue Menu and Smart Choice and Master's Choice. And a lot of these company brands are also promoting healthy choices. Now, again, these are not regulated by the government, and they're just solely based on what the manufacturer is marketing. And they do make some excellent products, but they also make some very lousy products that are still labeled healthy. So I think at the end of the day, the bottom line is to go beyond all these claims, look at the numbers yourself, and make a choice based on that. I just wanted to mention two more things before we sort of open up for questions. The first one is trans fat. Now, you might have noticed on the nutrition facts panels that I showed you, they list trans fat. And trans fat is mostly a man-made fat. It's used a lot in the industry in products like shortening and snack foods and deep-fried restaurant foods. It's a cheap fat to use and it extends the shelf life. And on the label, you'll see on the ingredient list, partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, and that's a trans fat. Now, the good news is in Canada, and I think also in the US, trans fat has now been banned in products. And in Canada, it was as of this September. So you don't have to worry about looking for that hydrogenated vegetable oil anymore. There are no products that have trans fat, and you'll notice that whenever you look at products right now, they say 0 trans fat. So that's good news. We don't have to worry about one thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about, not in great detail, but I just wanted to mention it because I often get questions, is organic better? There's so much misinformation around organic foods on the internet. There are lists like the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 that actually have no science behind them. So I just wanted to go through some basic tips. And I think again, it's a personal choice whether or not you eat organic, but it's important to remember that if a food is labeled organic, it means it doesn't contain man-made pesticides and fertilizers. It doesn't contain genetically modified organisms or GMOs, and it hasn't undergone irradiation. But it's also important to realize that organic foods can still have some pesticide residue. They're not pesticide free. And in fact, they do use what they call organic pesticides. There's also cross-contamination. So for example, if you have a field that's growing organic strawberries next to a field that's growing conventional strawberries, some of that pesticide can blow in the air. It can mix in the runoff water. There is contamination. So organic doesn't mean pesticide free. Also, when we look at the nutrients, not all organic foods are more nutritious than non-organic foods. The science is actually pretty equal in terms of the nutrition benefits. And I think it's important not to avoid things like fruits and vegetables if you can't find organic, because all fruits and vegetables have lots of nutrients and the benefits far outweigh any of the risks associated with the pesticides. Just wash them really well. And I think we're very lucky in North America and in most of Europe as well, where we have pretty strict guidelines in terms of the amount of pesticides that can be used and what ends up in our food products. So again, it's a personal choice. I wouldn't say one is better than the other, but it's up to you to decide whether you want to eat organic or not. Also, it comes down to cost, because a lot of organic foods are actually quite a bit more expensive than non-organic foods. Okay, so a question that just popped up: what about organic milk or eggs? And that's a great point. I think if we look at the food chain, the higher up we go, the more concentration of contamination and pesticides. So if you are going to eat organic, I would start with something like your dairy or your meats first, because that's probably the most concern. But again, it's a personal choice. Okay. So just to summarize, it's really important to understand how to read these food labels. But at the end of the day, the less we eat that comes in packages and doesn't have a label, the better off we are. So when you're in the grocery store, one of the tips I like to give is shop the perimeter of the store first. Fill your grocery cart with foods that don't have labels, things like your fresh fruits and vegetables. Shop more for whole foods and less for those highly processed foods. It doesn't mean that you're not going to shop in those middle aisles. You definitely need to, because that's where you find your grains and your legumes and your beans and your oils, and those are good to eat as well. But when you are looking at those packaged foods, look on the label, look at that nutrition facts panel, and remember that 5 and 15% rule. So 15% or more for the good stuff, like your fiber, your protein, your vitamins, and your minerals, and 5% or less for the things we want to eat less of, like that saturated fat and sodium. So things to remember. I think one of the great things that's come out of this pandemic when it comes to eating is that a lot more people are home more often, so they're cooking at home more often, and they're eating out less, and they're eating less processed foods. And that's great, because anything that you cook at home is a lot healthier for you than you're going to buy pre-prepared. I also see people making things like bread more often, and that's very exciting to see, because when you make something yourself, you know exactly what ingredients you're using, and it allows you to control the amount of extra salt or fat or sugar that you're adding to your food. So there are some pluses to being at home more often. I know we're running short on time, and Zora is coming up. But if you do have a package, if you're close to your kitchen right now and you can grab a package, something that you eat often, you might want to take a look and practice what we've learned today. Take a look at that ingredient list and look at the first 3 ingredients. look at that nutrition facts panel and look at the percent daily value for things like that saturated fat, sodium, fiber, and sugar. Is it what you're aiming for? And then look at the front of the package. Are there any claims that you're surprised about or that are misleading? So something to think about. I'm just going to go on and leave you with a few resources. I do realize that I've covered a lot of information this morning, and I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. I hope I've given you a few helpful tips, but lots of good resources when it comes to label reading. There's unlockfood.ca, which is run by Dietitians of Canada, and it's a great website for any nutrition-related information. Lots of good resources, handouts, recipes on there. I work for a hospital, and we've created Health University, which is composed of Cardiac College, Diabetes College, and Prevention College. And we have a section on label reading there, which I'll show you in a minute. And then if you are interested in learning more about the regulated claims and the label laws, Health Canada has a great information section on its website, and you can check those out. When it comes to Cardiac College, something I've been involved in is creating some healthy eating videos. And we have 19 short videos. They're only about 2 minutes long, and they give you some tips on how to choose healthy food. So for example, we have one on how to choose a healthy bread, how to choose a healthy yogurt, how to choose a healthy cooking oil, how to choose a healthy cheese. You know, if you get some time, check those out. They give you nice tips on what to look for in the grocery store. And at the end, you can actually download the information. So you can screenshot it or you can download it to your phone. And so you have the key information on how to choose a healthy product. It's on your phone. So when you're in the grocery store or when you're shopping online, you have that handy to look at. And so I hope that's helpful. So I know we're already at 12 o'clock. I think we can maybe spend a couple of minutes on any questions. I will go through some of them that have come in the chat box, and you're welcome to type in any others. So there's a question here. What are your thoughts on coconut oil for daily cooking? Okay, so coconut oil, another popular kind of trendy oil. I think you have to think about the type of fat in your cooking oil. So coconut oil is mostly saturated fat. It's the type that will raise your cholesterol. It doesn't have the same benefits or the antioxidants that we find in olive oil. So I would, generally recommend that you keep coconut oil for very occasional use. So once in a while, if you're using coconut milk in a curry or you're having a dessert with coconut, that's fine. But I think for a lot of us, especially when we have such a strong family history of heart disease and diabetes, and also some of us might be living with high cholesterol levels, coconut oil is probably not your best choice as a day-to-day cooking oil. Also, another question about oils. Other than olive oil, please talk about other oils. Vegetable oil is a mix, and it's probably not a healthy choice. And you're right. So a lot of oils that are labeled just vegetable oil are probably made with cheaper, less healthy oils. A lot of them have things like soybean oil or canola oil, but it doesn't really tell you the amount of each type of oil. And a lot of those oils, although they're not harmful, they're definitely not as healthy as your olive oil. Now, I do realize that olive oil is a little more expensive than the other oils. So it's not something that you're going to deep fry with, which I think actually is maybe not a bad thing because we're trying to avoid those fried foods. But I think in your everyday cooking, so for example, when you're sauteing or you're making a curry or a stir fry, using a couple of tablespoons of olive oil, the health benefits are definitely worth what you're paying for it. And using it on things like your salads is probably the best choice that you can make. And another great question, is it better to cook oil-free completely? And I'm so glad you brought that up. And the answer is no. Our body needs fat. The type of fat matters. So as long as we're focusing on more of the unsaturated fats that come mostly from plants, like your olive oil, your avocado, your nuts and seeds. Your body needs those. Those are essential, and you do want to use them. They actually help decrease inflammation and decrease your cholesterol levels. So it's very important to include oil in your diet. You don't want too much of it, but using a couple of tablespoons a day is not a bad thing. You don't want to go completely fat free because you're at risk of not meeting your requirements for essential fats and also losing out on some vitamins. So we know certain vitamins like vitamin D, vitamin K, vitamin A are what we call fat soluble. So they need a little bit of fat to be absorbed. So it's actually a good idea to use a little bit of oil in your cooking rather than going completely fat free. Okay, a question about milk. Is lactose-free milk a healthier choice? Great question. So lactose is a type of sugar that we find in milk, and it's naturally present there. A lot of us, especially coming from an Asian background, have a hard time digesting lactose, and we get gassiness and bloating, and it's not really comfortable when we have lactose. With lactose free milk, what they've done is they've broken down the lactose for you so it's easier to digest and you don't get the discomfort of lactose intolerance. Is it healthier? It's actually exactly the same in terms of nutrients and calcium and sugar as regular milk. So if you are lactose intolerant, it's a good choice. It's pretty much the same as drinking regular milk. Okay, so I think that's the questions I see in the chat box. We are just past 12 o'clock, and I know in Toronto it's Zohar time, so I don't want to keep you too long, but I wanted to really thank you for spending the hour with me this morning. I hope it's been helpful, and I hope moving forward you'll start looking at some labels and maybe even this afternoon, go into your fridge, go into your pantry, pick out some products and take a look at the labels, and maybe you'll be surprised with what you find. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.